All right, topic for today is the Ottomans. Now, can I assume we still have all the same basic needs like government, economy, foreign contacts, people of significance? Yes? All right, any new ones that jump out this time around, Alia?
Cultural influences.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, people of significance. All right, and then I guess we'll just hit the usual highlights. And again, this is supposed to be for your help. So if there are things that you definitely don't know, ask. There are no bad questions in these reviews, because we've just made you cover about 10,000 years of human history in less than a school year. So it's understandable if there are things that you've forgotten, things that you feel like you never learned. So again, the reason we do this is for you to have that opportunity to pick it back up, possibly for the first time. All right, so when we talk about the Ottomans and we talk about government, which civilization or government do the Ottomans follow after? The Abbasids, good. So we have a little starting point here. Now, I know that on your chart, that first column is crossed out. That's okay. That's not a problem. But if you want, in that crossed out section, you can write yourself a little reminder that they're coming after the Abbasids. That may help you with a sense of time and continuity. And the reasons that the Ottomans are able to begin is because what happens to the Abbasids? They fall, they get destroyed by the Mongols. Okay, so the Abbasids go bye-bye thanks to the Mongols, and I guess we could even put that down in like cultural influences if we want. So the phrase that we use when we talk about this is a power vacuum. So if you were in the classroom and the teacher left the room, at some point somebody would look around and go, hey, I don't think they're coming back. Right, and then somebody would make a suggestion. They might stand up and leave. They might stand up and start teaching because they think they know more than the teacher does, which some days might be true. You would have a power vacuum because the source of power, the source of authority, the teacher had left. And what always happens, people look for leadership. Somebody would step up and say, I am now the leader and I'm going to make the decision. Everybody else would go, oh, thank God, there's a leader here. We didn't know what to do, we were confused. If nobody stepped up, you might have a half hour, everybody just sitting in their desk, not wanting to be the first one to move, going, I don't know what to do. Do you know what to do? No, I don't know what to do. I guess we're just going to keep sitting here. At some point, somebody will step in and fill that power vacuum. So when the Abbasids are crushed by the Mongols, you have a power vacuum. Somebody is going to have to step into that in that region. And the Ottomans are one of the groups that do that. Now, what sort of government do we see the Ottomans develop? All right, pretty much the same as the Abbasids, right? And so it's not really surprising. I mean, it would have been surprising had they come in with a wildly different political structure. Like the Abbasids had this joint religious and political ruler, and then they go away and the Mongols happen and blah, 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 and then the Ottomans show up, and of course the Ottomans do, like, total democracy, right? That would have thrown us for a loop. But when they come in with essentially a centralized monarchy, it's not really shocking. It's a similar kind of government, similar authority put into the top ruler, political and religious authority. And much like the Abbasids, what other sorts of political problems do they seem to inherit? Lack of succession. And that's going to run all the way through. Now, the succession, that's who's going to take power next. Like in Western Europe, who's always supposed to take power next after a monarch? The oldest son, right? But the problem that we have in many of these Muslim empires is you don't have a clear rule of succession. With the Abbasids, it was the conflict between the Shia and the Sunni. With the Ottomans, it's simply that they don't always want the first son to have power. But without that clear rule, that means it's up for grabs every single time. The ruler is getting on in age and he's getting close to death, or even when he's perfectly healthy and he just has lots of kids and they all want to be ruler. So when we talk about the problem with the succession, if you need to, one of the things you can write with the cultural influences is that you don't have the Shia-Sunni conflict. Because that was such a big deal with the Abbasids that it's noteworthy now that you don't have that with one of these Muslim empires. Because the Ottomans are predominantly what? Sunni. And so we can throw that down here with dominant religions. Sunni Islam. Now, other groups within the Ottoman Empire that will develop political power. Who should we put into that category? The Janissaries. So especially as we move on to the early modern era, the Janissaries are going to have a great deal of political influence as well. Similar to the bureaucrats in China, similar to the samurai in Japan. When you have a group that wields tremendous influence in society, they kind of get what they want.
What did they do in the post-conflict in Afghanistan?
Well, the Ottomans are only around for part of the post-classical era. So if we look up at our timeline at the top, the Ottoman Empire doesn't really start until the very, very end of the 13th century. So they really only have about 150 years of the post-classical era. So they're really just getting their feet under them. And they actually almost totally disappear at that point. I feel like we're just going to be jumping around today, but that's okay. So one of the people that you're going to want, and he's already down there in your persons of significance list, is Tamerlane, Timur the Lame. He has been referred to by all of those names. But basically, he was like the second coming of Genghis Khan. He came out of Central Asia with a nomadic army and basically repeated the Mongol conquest throughout the Middle East. Dude was tough. Almost as ruthless as the Mongols. He actually thought he was a direct descendant. He may actually have been. He thought he was a direct descendant of Genghis Khan, and he wanted to duplicate and even improve upon the Mongol conquest. And so just as the Ottoman Empire is getting up and going, Tamerlane comes sweeping through the Middle East and just wrecks the Ottoman Empire. And he actually takes, I think it was the son of the first Sultan, Osman II, and he throws him in a cage on the back of a wagon and then proceeds to drag him back east towards Central Asia. And so like the Ottoman Empire itself is now in total disarray. And they're on the verge of just collapse because, again, without that leader, you have a power vacuum. Now, they're able to rally together and come back and make it all work. But that's why we don't have a whole lot for them for the post-classical era, because they're really just getting started. Now, since we just touched on persons of significance, Osman is the guy that starts the Ottoman Empire. He's the first sultan. So if you didn't know who that was, now you do. And G.I. Joe says knowing is half the battle. All right, so coming back to government. By the time we get all the way to the present era, we're going to have a change in government. And the story goes something like this. We've had sultans ever since the post-classical age when the Ottoman Empire starts. They've gotten progressively suckier and suckier. We've had some good ones. We've had some amazing ones like Suleiman. But then we've had some really just plain stupid awful ones. And what we've finally gotten to, especially as we progress through to the modern era, is that Western Europe and you've heard this story time and time again, Western Europe, now with the advent of the Industrial Revolution, is beginning to exert its influence on other parts of the world. The Ottomans are no exception. They're not spared from this at all. And so as the West becomes more and more influential and more powerful, the Ottomans, just like many, many other societies, are faced with a choice. What are their two options? Westernize or stick with tradition and maybe, possibly, die. Yes. Good, Stephen. I like that. And so what we find politically is that you do have this period in the modern era of attempted reform, where you do have a series of sultans that are willing to engage at the very least in the discussion, if not actually act on these ideas of modernization and westernization. But as we've seen in so many other places, what are some of the things that get in their way? Do what, Stephen? The conservatives, whoever that happens to be in their civilization, and in this case, who were one of the biggest conservative groups in the Ottoman Empire. The Janissaries. The Janissaries don't want to change because under the current system, they have so much power and so much influence and so much wealth. From their perspective, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And we've also had a series of sultans that have fallen victim to the same thing that we've talked about with China and with lots of other places. The leader oftentimes becomes entirely too comfortable and stops working hard and simply enjoys all of his luxuries and all of his toys. But we are going to see this period of attempted reform in the modern era. You will have a series of sultans, and two of them are listed under your persons of significance. You've got, and I think it's, no, that is right. Mahmud II is the one that implements the Tanzimat reforms. Where do we want to put Tanzimat reforms? Cultural influences? Government? I don't know. Wherever you want to put it, it's fine. But that was the formal attempt by the Ottoman Empire to actually engage in some of this westernization, to bring in Western technology, not just for the military, but also the telegraph, the printing press, railroads, all of that stuff. An attempt to shift society in a more modern direction. Marginally successful. They do make some progress. But at this point, again, like we've seen with so many other civilizations, the West has just had too much of a head start. And within their society itself, you've got too many groups, and there's enough of them that aren't happy that they're pushing back, even against this attempted westernization. And so then the other guy that you want to know, who's also already on your sheet, is the final sultan, Abdulhameed. And Abdulhameed actually tries to reverse this whole process of westernization and re-seize power. I'm not even sure if that's an accurate expression, but we're going to go with it. Take power back into the hands of the sultan. Now, after you've just made all of these attempts at westernizing and modernizing, you've gotten some people on board with this idea. If a sultan comes along now and tries to undo all of it, what's probably going to happen? All right, A, he might be successful because he's a sultan. What's another option? Do what, Eileen? Revolt, because you've already gotten people on board with this idea of change. And now if you're going to pull all that out from under them, you're going to leave a whole lot of people feeling very, very frustrated and probably even betrayed. It's like, hey, I thought we were doing this cool new thing. I was on board with it. I like the change. I like where we were going. Wait, what do you mean we're not doing that now? What do you mean we're going back to the old way? The old way wasn't working. Are you blind? What are you doing? And you find yourself in this no-win situation. Because if you keep moving forward with the changes, who's unhappy? Right, the Janissaries, your traditionalists, your conservatives. But if you try to make them happy, who's now feeling left out and grumpy? Right, people that want to reform. You're modernists. So Abdulhameed is going to be the guy that effectively touches off the revolution that will ultimately leave Turkey in the present era with a new form of government, a republic. This is when it will begin to cease being the Ottoman Empire and instead will become the Republic of Turkey. And who's the group that's responsible for this? Young Turks. I don't know, we'll put them here in cultural influences. Now, do the Young Turks really get a fair shot at trying to see if they can fix Turkey? Not really, because what happens? World War I. Oops. Bad timing. Now, prior to World War I, guess who the Ottomans were getting a lot of their modern technology and modern training from? Germany. So, in foreign contacts, Germany has had a huge influence on the Ottoman Empire. And so when World War I breaks out, who do you go fight with if you're Turkey? Germany. You go fight with your buddy. It's not like you're suddenly going to turn your back on them and be like, no, because now it's World War I and we all know what's going to happen and you're going to lose, so I'm going to jump ship now. Nobody does that. They're like, wow, Germany's the most powerful nation in Europe. Of course I want to be on your team. Hey, best friend, what's up? Unfortunately, we know how this ends. Germany loses World War I, which now means that the Ottoman Empire has tied itself to the losing side. And so they will see nowhere near the same degree of punishment as Germany, but they will definitely suffer as well. And that will be the official end of the Ottoman Empire and the beginning of Turkey as we know it today. Now, one last thing for you to know. How many of you, when we asked you to circle or highlight things on the master sheet that you didn't know, how many of you highlighted or circled mandates? Okay. How many of you know what colonies are? You've heard the word before, I hope. Otherwise, we should all be fired right now. You've all heard colonies, yes? Okay. Mandates are colonies. It's a huge oversimplification, but essentially, mandates were European colonies in the Middle East, controlled very, very similarly to the way that China was with those spheres of influence. There's probably like college professors that would be listening to this just shrieking, no, that's not right, you're saying it wrong. I don't really care. For your purposes, when you hear mandate, similar to colony. And so what's going to happen after World War I is that the Middle East is going to be colonized and turned into a series of mandates. All right, are we good so far? Yes? Ish? You can nod your heads if that's all you have the energy for. Okay. Well, we might as well touch on economics then, even though we've kind of hit some of this already. At the outset, the Ottoman Empire finds itself in a very, very ideal location for trade because they are at the crossroads of a very wealthy Eastern world, China, India, Silk Road, all of that, and also the closest now to this suddenly growing and expanding Western European world. So the Ottomans become this crossroads of the Eastern Hemisphere. And it seems like all trade and all traffic and all money and all ideas and all knowledge are going through them on its way to someplace else. That makes the Ottomans incredibly wealthy and incredibly knowledgeable and incredibly powerful. So, economic characteristics, the Ottoman Empire is a center of trade, and you could probably even say center of global trade. And are the Ottomans just these happy, super peaceful, super chill guys? You can feel free to respond, yes or no. No, what do they do? What do they build? Yeah, they build a huge military, and then they all go have picnics, right? No, what do? Right, they go conquer. They go build an empire. That brings them wealth as well. One of the highlights of that conquest is the capture of Constantinople. Where do we want to put that? Somewhere. I like that idea. Okay, I'll leave that up to you. Write down capture of Constantinople someplace that makes sense. Probably not in treatment of women or status of merchants, but put it someplace. Right, there should be a section for people you conquered. I don't know what I was thinking when I left that out. Capture Constantinople. All right, so we have the Ottoman Empire as a center of trade. I think on your answer sheet it says serves as a connection between East and West. It also gives you some idea of their valuable trade goods. Textiles, and what do we mean when we say textiles? Like cloth. Woven goods, typically. And then also coffee. Coffee is going to become a huge moneymaker for them, especially as that drink gains popularity in Western Europe, although they're first going to have to figure out that it's okay for them to drink because they initially don't trust it because, of course, it comes from the Muslim world. And as Europeans, they are suspicious of all things that come from there because they're simple. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like I said, they're simple. Okay, and so for quite a while, the Ottomans are an economic powerhouse because of their location, because of their trade goods. But again, much as we said earlier politically, economically they begin to suffer because what's happening in Western Europe? Industrialization. The West's economy is booming. They are able to mass produce products far more cheaply. And with some of these inventions like the spinning jenny, what was that loom called? I don't know. They're able to manufacture textiles more efficiently and more cheaply than the places in the Eastern world that had always been famous for them, like the Ottomans, like India. And so now you find Ottoman merchants are being undersold. Goods from the West are cheaper and more readily available than these handmade products in the Ottoman Empire. And so now it's like when you guys go to the store, if you can get something that's really, really high quality for $500 or something that looks more or less the same for $20, what do you buy? And if you're buying the $500 one, we need to become friends. You buy the cheaper one, right? Okay, this is the problem that the Ottoman Empire develops. They begin to decline economically because they can't compete with the West. The West is able to outproduce and underbid, or however you want to phrase the fact that their stuff is cheaper. You can even write down their stuff is cheaper. And so again, that brings us right back to what we were talking about earlier, which is the Ottoman desire to westernize in an attempt to salvage their economy and regain their wealth and power. It doesn't go well because of that traditional resistance, but also because the West doesn't want people to compete with them. They don't want to just hand over all their technology and say, here's exactly how we do it. You go become just as great and powerful as we are. They didn't learn to share. They didn't want to share. Okay. You guys said cultural influences and foreign contacts. So we've got a whole bunch there for you to look at. Let's talk through them real quick. The Byzantines, that's going to be a source of constant conflict between the Ottomans and the Byzantines. Ultimately, who will win that conflict? Ottomans, good, because they capture Constantinople and they rename it Istanbul. If you've never listened to the song, you should, because it's awesome. You also have the continued Arab influence because the Ottomans are coming after what civilization? The Abbasids. Continued Arab influence because the Ottomans are coming after the Abbasids. When the Abbasids leave, it's not just the Ottomans that start up. You also have the Safavids, or the Safavids. A similar style civilization, Shia rather than Sunni, but similarly built, similarly developed, similar hierarchy in society. They're just smaller. And so you're going to have almost this big brother, little brother conflict constantly until, as all older siblings should, they just pound the younger one into submission. My apologies to all you younger siblings. It's good for you. You're also going to have the growing influence of Western Europe at this point as a cultural influence. And if you look up at the timeline at the top, you're going to notice a trend. You've got the capture of Constantinople in 1453, and then after that, it seems to begin a long, slow decline. And it seems like more and more the West is gaining power, and the Ottomans are slipping. And especially once you get past Suleiman, you've got military loss after military loss after military loss. And so you can really trace the decline of the Ottomans this way as well. Sharina, what was your question?
What was the
Battle of Lepanto was a naval battle. I know I told my kids this story, but you guys probably forgot. We typically put Suleiman the Magnificent as the greatest of the Ottoman sultans. Right? Nod your heads. Okay, good. But remember we talked about the problems with the succession? All right, there were a few Ottoman sultans that were so adamant that they were going to stay in power for as long as possible that they actually had their children executed in order to prevent them from rising up and overthrowing them. And so both Suleiman and Suleiman's father began this practice of strangling their children using the bowstring of the royal bow. It's like this silken cord. Right. Well, this was more ceremonial. Plus, chopping off heads is so messy. I mean, you get blood all over the place, and you got all these really nice carpets. Yeah, but sometimes as the ruler, you gotta, do things yourself. Or at least order somebody to do it in your presence, so at least they know why it's happening. But at any rate, so what happens after Suleiman is Suleiman's son, the one that he does allow to live and take power after him, is fairly, well, we can call him a moron. And so the Battle of Lepanto is a naval battle that his son engages in, still believing that he is a military genius and that the Ottomans are indestructible, and he sends his fleet out against, I don't even remember who it was now. Was it Austria? Or no, was it the Venetians? I don't know. Anyway, he sent all his boats out, and all his boats got sunk. And without a navy, then it gets really, really hard to control the Eastern Mediterranean. Anyway, so as you get to the modern era, Russia and Britain and France become some of the more important cultural influences. You're actually going to have a war over the Ottoman Empire, fought by Russia and Great Britain. It's called the Crimean War. Russia's going to think that now that the Ottoman Empire is weak, that they can bite off a couple pieces, and the British are like, no, we're not going to let Russia get bigger because they're already too big. And so they actually duke it out over the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottomans just like, God, we can't stop either one of them. I guess we just sit here and watch the fun. And then ultimately when we get to the present era, when we talked about those mandates, those are going to be implemented largely by the British. So the British are going to be your big cultural influence in the present era. Yeah, Eileen? Crimean War is like 1850 something? 1853? Maybe? Possible? All right. Persons of significance, because I know you said you needed help with that. The Venetians? All right. Okay. All right, we gave you the first two for the post-classical. Osman, who is the founder of the Ottoman Empire. Tamerlane, which is the guy that almost wrecks it. Oh, yeah. In the early modern, we have Suleiman, perhaps the greatest of all the Ottoman sultans, known as Suleiman the Great, Suleiman the Magnificent, Suleiman the Lawgiver. Those are pretty sweet nicknames. You also have just before him, so I apologize for putting them out of order chronologically, but Mehmet II. Anybody remember what he did? He's the one that captures Constantinople. That's kind of a big deal. And then we talked about Mahmud II. He's the Tanzimat reforms. We talked about Abdulhameed. He's the guy that attempts to seize power, is the last sultan. Kind of, fumbles that a little bit. You may or may not remember Muhammad Ali. He was the guy in Egypt that was trying to separate from Ottoman control and was trying to westernize, and he was having a similarly unsuccessful attempt at it. And then Mustafa Kemal, otherwise known as Ataturk, is going to be the first leader of the Republic of Turkey. He's kind of a big deal too. All right, we got a few minutes left. Are there any other areas of major weakness that you guys need help with in terms of the Ottomans? Hannah? Through trade along the Silk Road, yeah, they'll be connected. They're not in any sort of alliance. They're not enemies. They're not best friends. The Mughals are, remember when we talked about those gunpowder empires, the Ottomans, the Safavids, and the Mughals? The Mughals have that interesting distinction of being a partially Hindu society and a partially Muslim society, so they don't necessarily fit into the same characteristics as the Ottomans and the Safavids. Right. Other questions or areas where you have issues? No? Okay. Tomorrow is an informal review session, so that's where you guys can come with questions. And Miss Bird, I think you were still offering essay? Yes. Okay. So if you want to have practice with essays as well, we'll have some practice prompts for you. And you can practice writing out thesis statements, body paragraphs, things like that, and you can get some quick, immediate feedback on those. Thursday then is Western Europe, I believe.
Well, yes, it's my
Okay. That's going to be fun because we're going to try to do all of Western Europe in 45 minutes, which is a beast. And then Friday is changeover time, I think. All right. So thank you guys for coming, and we'll see you later.